Hey, welcome to ISU Crops TV, put on by ISU Extension. My name is Rick Cruz. I'm professor in the Department of Agronomy. I want to recognize other team members that are critical to make this happen. One is Daryl Hersman, who had an important role in putting this together, Brian Gelder and David James. I want to address today the impact of changing precipitation trends on soil erosion risks. Now, as we go through this, there will be some numbers that will show associated with soil erosion loss rates that are occurring in Iowa. I don't want anyone to take offense. It's not targeted at anybody. We're not blaming anybody. We have to understand farmers are managing land, and land experiences a lot of rainfall energy. Water is powerful. 4.7 tons of TNT equivalent energy is found in 40 inches of rain falling on 100 acres. Now, for those that hunt, understand that one 12-gauge shotgun shell has about 1/20th of an ounce of gunpowder, similar to TNT, to give you just an idea of how much power is in that falling rain. So farmers must not only grow a crop, manage a crop, keep water in place, they must manage that rainfall and water such that it doesn't degrade soils. So the basic soil erosion process is really quite simple. There's basically three principal components. One is detachment. When the raindrop strikes the soil surface or flowing water will detach particles from the main soil body. Those detached soil particles can then be transported. They can be transported in flowing water, or part of the transport process that takes place occurs when that raindrop strikes the soil surface, detaches that particle, and actually splashes that. Now you might say, yeah, that's not moving much. If you're on a steep slope, what direction is that soil material going to be detached, splashed, and moved? It will be transported down slope. Okay, so you've got detachment, we have transport. The final step is that of deposition. Where does that soil eroded material end up? By and large, the majority of it ends up in the field. It moves down slope towards lower gradient. Some of it ends up in the river. Some of it ends up in the Mississippi River. That's how the Louisiana Delta was built. The detachment process is driven by rainfall kinetic energy. Kinetic energy, when it strikes a soil, especially a weakened soil, has a large impact of detaching particles, as I've been preaching, and then moving those particles in that splashed material. The material that's loosened now is available for transport processes. My dad always told me, he says, close the dang door. Actually, he was talking about gates. When cattle got out one time, I left a gate open. You ask me, why am I using that now? If we're dealing with the erosion process, like the horse, it's easier to close the door than to get the horse after it's loose. It's easier to control erosion by stopping the detachment process. Stop the door, close the door on the erosion process that's occurring. So how do you do that? You intercept that rainfall energy. That can be done a variety of ways. You can do it with cover crops. You can do it with the canopy of the crop itself. You can do it with crop residue left on the soil surface. Whatever you can do to intercept that falling energy, and there's a lot of it, will go a long ways to keeping the horse in the barn. Detachment is a problem for us in that it not only loosens the particles so that they're available for erosion or movement across the landscape, it's the driver for surface seal development. All of us have seen a bare soil following a heavy rainstorm. You end up with a surface that's smooth, like on this picture. When you have that condition, you have decreased infiltration rates, which leads to increased runoff. Increased runoff increases the transport potential and ultimately increases soil erosion. It has negative impacts on emergence of crops, especially those like soybeans. Stopping the detachment rate, stopping detachment, intercepting falling rainfall is the most important thing you can do to controlling soil erosion losses. So the next step is the transport of sediment. Transport of sediment occurs on fields in flowing water. Now there are rills, these little channels that occur that you will see following a rainstorm, and those are the channels in which transport has occurred. In areas where water concentrates, you will get ephemeral gullies forming. Ephemeral gullies have larger volumes of water, greater velocity of water carrying, and with that velocity comes energy and capacity to cut soil, detach, and to move that material down slope. It's very difficult, it's really challenging to stop the transport process. We can manage deposition to some extent. Deposition management simply means we are controlling where that deposition occurs. An example is a vegetated prairie buffer or vegetated prairie strip illustrated here. You can have vegetated filter strips, you can have wascobs, water and sediment controlled basins. Terraces, they intercept the flow of water and slow the flow so that you get sediment settled out. Ponds will do the same thing. So deposition is controlled or managed by slowing the flow rate of water, the velocity of water, which then causes the sediment to settle. And if you use a specific management practice which does this in a given location, that is a way that you can manage deposition. But understand, deposition is not stopping soil erosion. It's simply controlling where the lost soil material is deposited. So why worry about soil erosion? I mean, it's ugly to look on the landscape and everybody talks about it, but let's look at a plot of corn yield on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis is the A-horizon depth. Now, A-horizon is the topsoil. It's that organic matter-rich black layer. Iowa is known for its black soil, black gold. And anyway, what happens when that A-horizon depth diminishes in depth? The horizontal axis on the maximum depth on this is about 50 inches, and it goes down to 0 on the left-hand side. This data was collected in central Iowa between Ames and Boone. The data was collected from 4 years in which rainfall was below normal during the summer. Now that is important, and that soils that are degraded from erosion have greatest productivity challenges under stressful conditions. That A-horizon is rich in nutrients, it increases infiltration rates, it has good water holding capacity. So under stress conditions, which we may have climatic-wise, weather-wise, as that topsoil thins, what has happened to the yields that were observed? These are measured farm field yields. As we get to about 10 inches, there's a very rapid drop-off of yield. This is seen time and time again. When we get down to 0 topsoil depth with water stress conditions, our yields plummet. So we have a variety of individuals, including myself, that ponder sometimes if the modern hybrids can negate, minimize, or eliminate the erosion stress effects on this lowering of yield potential. We have seen very high yields this year in 2021 in areas where was really significant drought and water stress. The evidence suggests that they do not. While they have elevated yields, I have yet to see a crop yield map that has a uniform color across the entire field. Why is that? It's because crop yields are reduced in zones where soil quality, soil health is not good. Yields may be elevated compared to what we've experienced 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago. But the capacity to produce when you are devoid of necessary inputs, water and nutrients especially, cannot be or has not been at this point in time solved with modern hybrids. Land degradation has a negative impact on crop yields. So how much of the area that we farm is actually suffering from reduced topsoil depth? Okay, this is from a study that was published the spring of 2021. And it asked the question, what percent of the land area in the Corn Belt is devoid of topsoil? Not thinned, devoid, gone, missing. This study indicates their best estimate was on average 35% of the farmed land area in the Corn Belt is devoid of topsoil. It's missing, it's gone. It's not 10 inches thick, it's gone. Now go back to that yield curve that I showed. What impact does that have? Under stress conditions, it has a very significant impact. In 2012, and most of you probably remember, or will remember that 2012 was a hot, dry year. I don't know how many farmers I had tell me, say, Rick, I can tell you exactly where I have an erosion problem by looking at my yield map. There was nothing there. Heat, stress actually destroyed their yield potential in those areas. So let's look at another study. Okay, frequently when you're looking at evidence, and if you can look at trying to tell a story from multiple different angles, if all the stories aligned, it's informative, really informative. Okay, so this study was done by a group at Michigan State University, where they used infrared color from above, aerial estimates of the infrared color, to estimate areas in the field that were undergoing crop stress. Now, infrared color, what is infrared color and what's that got to do with this? When water evaporates, when you step out of a shower, and the humidity in the air outside of the shower is low, what do you feel? Is your skin warm? Mine isn't. Evaporation cools skin. It takes roughly 540 times more energy to evaporate a given volume of water than it does to raise the temperature of that water roughly 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Evaporation is a large energy sink. Okay, so when we go back to this infrared color is simply measuring the color of a surface based on the long wave transmission of light waves off that surface. But nonetheless, it's a measure of the temperature of the crop. If the crop temperature is elevated in one part of the field compared to another part, that means that area with an elevated temperature is under stress. That stress will impact and ultimately reduce yields of those areas. So this study was done looking at the percent of the areas that had high and consistent yields year to year, areas in fields, areas that were sometimes high and sometimes low. In other words, they experienced stress some years and not others. And then areas that were consistently low. In this research, they found that roughly 26% of the area had low and stable yields. 26% of the area had low and stable yields. Now, if we go back to the previous study that was published in this spring of this year, they indicated about 35% of the land area was devoid of topsoil. Both these studies were done completely differently. Scientists don't even know each other, at least I don't think they do. but their information, their results are pointing in the same direction. That we have areas of the field that should give crops stress, those devoid of topsoil. A study that indicates it's measuring crop stress in areas of the field that roughly match what's observed in terms of devoided topsoil areas. The two studies are pointing the same direction, even though they come out of or through different doors. Nah, this can't be in Iowa. We can't have that amount of area of devoided topsoil. This aerial shot was taken in north central Iowa in the Des Moines lobe. Now, the Des Moines lobe is notorious for having low soil erosion potential. Now, obviously, it's rained here recently. We see the ponded areas. But I'm more interested in those light-colored areas on the landscape identified by these areas. What are we seeing? That's not the black, organic matter-rich topsoil that Iowa is known for. What you're seeing is the subsoil. It's the B horizon. These areas are areas that are devoid of topsoil. And this area is an area that is notorious for keeping its topsoil in place. So what does this look like from the ground? You can drive on almost any highway, any road in Iowa in the spring. If you're looking at a field in which tillage and residue cover tillage has occurred and residue cover has been removed, it's common to see these types of scenes. It's common. Areas where topsoil no longer exists. So I'll ask again, what percent of the Midwest soils are resilient? They produce high and stable yields. We didn't address this on that graph, but it was about 46%. That was a study when they were looking at the infrared stability of temperatures. What percent of the Midwest soils has consistently low yields? 26%. And the area of devoided topsoil in that one study was estimated to be about 35%. So it's telling a story that it's telling me that we need to pay attention, that these things are telling something quite similar, even they're approaching the story in different ways. So what is the current situation if we look across the globe? Let's get outside of Iowa a little bit. We'll get to this rainfall and precipitation impact on erosion here in a little bit, but to build a case why it's important. Okay, this is a color-coded map that identifies the soil and land terrain suitability for rain-fed crops across the globe. Okay, the color codes indicate a green scheme is that productivity is high. As we move to the yellows, oranges, and grays, it's low. So I want to identify, and I've circled, I think, 4 different areas on this map. One is us. It's the central U.S., highly productive. These are mollisols or prairie-derived soils. Soils that developed under prairies. There's another area that are mollisols, prairie-derived soils, highly productive. It's a smaller area in South America. There's another area of mollisols, a smaller area in northeast China, circled. And then there's an area that's quite productive in India. Can you understand, remember where those are? Because I'm going to show you a graph next, or a figure next, that was done 2 decades later that addressed the potential soil erosion based on rainfall, based on soil, and based on landscape characteristics. And I have placed circles on this graph that are aligned or match where the soils were placed on the previous graph that shows the high areas or areas of high potential rain-fed production. Okay, the color codes for this, the greens, low erosion potential. As we move to the yellows, oranges, and reds, the erosion potential increases. So what do we see relative to erosion potential in those same areas that we have the greatest terrain and soil potential for producing food and feed? The areas in which we have the greatest capacity to produce are also the areas that have the seemingly greatest, or at least high, soil erosion potential. The risk of removing topsoil, the risk of negatively impacting yields. Okay, we're getting to a point where some people are probably thinking, yeah, here's another tree-hugging bird watcher that's trying to create the melodrama that the world's coming to an end. Well, you're partially right that I am a tree hugger, but I hug my trees with a Summit deer stand, and I would like to watch my birds down the barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun. Okay, so bad humor maybe is better than no humor at all, but we try. Okay, so with the thought that, yeah, with the new hybrids, with where we are in modern agriculture, this is never going to happen. I want you to just take a few seconds and read this piece that's on the screen. Okay, now this is not a script from a movie. This is actually a Reuters news release less than a decade ago. We had conditions in which global food security was a serious concern. Russia closed its borders because trying to withhold wheat that they had. India had suspended export of onions. There was serious concern about the potential to be short globally of food. The food to stocks ratio, the amount of food that was in storage or available should we stop producing or processing, was in terms of days, not weeks. The potential for this to occur is real. Remember, Mother Nature bats last. So I'm going to challenge you. There's different ways of keeping the attention of the audience. One is to tell a lot of jokes and hopefully they laugh and they stay attention for that reason. The other one is to irritate them. And I'm going to try to irritate you right now. I'm going to tell you, even though we've talked about soil erosion, you have no idea what it means when we tell you the soil is eroding, or your soil is eroding at 5 tons per acre per year. What does that mean? Where does that soil go? Is that soil that leaves the farm? Is that soil that, does it have to get to the river? Okay, remember there's processes: detachment, transport, and deposition. We are estimating what happens associated with the first 2 parts of those processes. We're going to look at a hill slope and draw a couple arrows. There's the yellow arrow and a combination of black arrows. When we tell you, or someone says to you, NRCS says to you, that your farm program or your farm plan will allow 5 tons, pick your number, doesn't that be 5, tons of soil erosion per year, what it says: the equivalent amount, or the amount of 5 tons per acre per year moving along that yellow arrow, passes the head of the yellow arrow, and that's it. The estimate is how much sediment moves along that part of the hill slope past the point at which we think channel processes, ephemeral gully development, occurs on those hill slopes. See, our soil erosion models, Russell, Webb, primarily those two, work with or estimate sheet and rill erosion only. There are versions of those that can do ephemeral gullies, but what NRCS uses, what we dominantly use, is basically sheet and rill soil erosion estimates. So anything that happens below that yellow arrow is not considered in any soil erosion estimate. Globally, world literature reviews suggest that ephemeral gully erosion accounts for about 1/3 of all the soil erosion that's lost, or all the soil erosion that occurs. Now understand, the caveat is that soil that moves from through and within an ephemeral gully is going to transport or be moved typically much further than sheet and rill erosion will move. So when you have a farm plan that says that you're going to control soil erosion to 5 tons per acre per year, it simply means that on your highly erodible land that you will have a plan that keeps soil loss at or below the 5 tons per acre. And soil loss means that moving along this portion of the slope that's represented by the yellow arrow. Okay, so how much soil is actually moving in Iowa or being estimated as eroded soil? We are using what's called the Daily Erosion Project to make this estimate. We are estimating soil erosion losses on these hill slopes, that yellow arrow, across the state of Iowa, all of Minnesota, parts of Kansas, parts of Nebraska, and the area that we're covering is growing. So the question is, how do you do this? How do we in Iowa make a soil erosion estimate, in this case, for over 200,000 hill slopes in the state? And we do it on a daily basis. Well, the first thing we need is a process-based soil erosion model, WEP. And we're not going to go deep into modeling, but I want you to understand how this thing works, because it's critical for what our numbers mean to you. You've heard the adage or cliche that garbage in and garbage out. You can have the best model in the world, and I said we're making estimates on over 200,000 hill slopes in the state of Iowa. How do you get the information every day for each one of those hill slopes so that you can get a reliable estimate of soil erosion in each one of those? Okay, so we have the water erosion prediction model, WEP, and that is our process-based model that we're using. It's been vetted in the literature. It's been tested. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, but it's not bad. We can't use Russell. Russell is not process-based. When compared the two when they're compared under given conditions, known conditions, they pretty well match. Okay, so how do we make WEP work on all these hill slopes? It's done with remote sensing. We use radar and other approaches added to the radar product to give us a rainfall estimate for every 1 square kilometer, about 1/6 of a square mile. We have a rainfall estimate every 2 minutes. We use LIDAR, which is the most accurate, publicly available surface elevation model that we can get. We have an elevation measurement every 2 meters or 3 meters, depending upon which version of WEP we're using, or which version of the Daily Erosion Project we're using. We use G-Circle, which is electronic soils database. For every 10 square meters, we have a soils estimate. We have to know all the field boundaries in the state. You say, why do you need to know that? Well, management decisions are made within fields. And management, especially tillage and the crops that are being grown, have a critical role in the amount of erosion that occurs. So we have remote sensing, again, aerial imagery, satellite imagery, and electronic databases that allow us to get those field boundaries. And then within each field, we make an estimate what management practice is being used and what crop is being grown. The model then spits out an estimated crop yield, which is interesting but not too important for us, and it gives us water runoff and soil erosion. So what is this model telling us? Okay, this is an example of our annual soil erosion estimates across the state for 4 different years. Do they look, some components of it look similar. Some of them look different as you go from between years. The top left corner occurred in a year in which we had much more rainfall. Obviously, we had some erosion rates. The color code for the erosion is on the bar to the right of each picture. We had some erosion rates in some areas that are well over 20 tons per acre in that given year. If we go to the lower right-hand corner, we're looking at 2012. What type of rainfall did we have in 2012? Well, we didn't have much. And everyone knows if it doesn't rain, we don't get the kind of erosion that we do when it does rain. Also, can you tell from this where that for the Des Moines lobe is? That's that north central Iowa area that every year has low soil erosion rates. Likewise, can we tell where the Luss Hills are? And even in that northeast corridor of the karst area, yeah, we can. Slopes, soil types drive, and rainfall drive when erosion occurs and where. The average soil loss from 2008 to 2015, statewide, that's that black number in the middle of this graph, was 5.15 tons per acre for that given year. That's averaging soil loss across that entire area. If we were to compare this to the NRI, that's the National Resources Inventory, that's the USDA's estimate of soil erosion potential for, in this case, it would have been the year 2012, which falls within this time bracket that we have for this graph. Their number was a bit higher. It was about 5.8 tons per acre per year. Now we did something else. We've run this from 2008 through 2020. And you see that that number in the middle of the screen here is 3.1 tons per acre per year. Now somebody's thinking, it won't drop that much averaging all those years together by just adding 2 years, and you're exactly right. We adjusted the crop yield component parameters so that we're now, for this estimate, we went crop yield from a statewide average of about 140 to 180 bushels per acre. Adding that increase in yield does what to the amount of biomass that's produced? There's a ratio of biomass to grain yield for corn, almost every crop. As you increase your yield, you increase biomass. What does biomass do relative to intercepting rainfall energy? Biomass is a great tool for helping control soil erosion rates. So increasing the biomass amount had a significant impact on soil erosion reduction estimates. Now you say, yeah, how do you do that? Well, this model is set up so that the data, the information we put in are like data layers. The rainfall exists as a data layer for each year. The management we use, everything, all the inputs are the same. So in this situation, to go to 3.1 tons per acre per year, other than adding 2 additional years, we simply took out the crop yield data layer that existed before, 140 tons per bushels per acre, and slid in the change of modeling 180 bushels per acre. Everything else was the same. So increasing the amount of biomass, particularly, we understand we have a lot of fields that have residue cover on them. Increasing biomass would increase residue cover and therefore reduce our soil erosion rate estimates. Okay, timing of tillage, timing of erosion is critical to those of us that work with controlling soil erosion losses. There is a temporal component, when erosion occurs, and a spatial component, where does that erosion occur? Agencies such as NRCS have a finite amount of resources, or Iowa Department of Ag and Land Resources. They have a finite amount of resources they can use to target where soil erosion is occurring. Where is the most important impact that they can have? Certain practices work well early in the year, cover crops. Those practices may not work so well later in the year. So knowing when erosion occurs is critically important. Okay, I'm going to press an animation bar on this screen, and if you look in the upper left-hand corner, it gives you the average statewide soil erosion rate as we move through time. As the animation bar trips, the date in the upper right-hand corner will start from January 1 and go through December 31 of 2018, and you will see the color codes change. The ramp is on the right, and you will see where and when our soil erosion occurred in 2018 across the state. Okay, so let's move into our changing precipitation patterns. We tried to stress why soil erosion is important, tried to discuss how it occurs, and a little bit about what we can do to stop it. So one of the things we cannot control is our precipitation, when it occurs and how much. So let's look at some trends. Okay, this is data from Cedar Rapids, and I selected Cedar Rapids data because this is what I got from Gene Tackley, who is a real climatologist, retired now. But it's got a good set of data. Okay, so this is a plot of total annual precipitation in Cedar Rapids starting in the 1800s and going through roughly the 2000 teens. I think 2000, I don't think it got to 2020. But what do we see? We see increasing precipitation annual through that time period. A lot of variability, but the amount of precipitation that occurs is increasing. So let's do a little bit of data snooping and let's ask the question, how many years had precipitation of more than 40 inches? In the first half of that record, there was 1. How many in the second half of that record? There was 11 of them. After 1950, we had 11 years with more than 40 inches, with 1 year close to 60. That's a 32% increase as we go from the 1980s or 1800s to 2000, roughly 2015, 2020. That increase in terms of the number of years with more than 40 inches of rainfall. Let's look at another chart. This is the number of days with total precipitation greater than or equal to 1.25 inches. Now, why 1.25 inches? Hydrologists use 1.25 inches as kind of their rule of thumb in terms of when runoff starts on most landscapes. So if you get more than 1.25 inches in a given day, you're likely to see a little bit of runoff or some runoff occurring. So again, we look at the best fit line, we end up at, or show at the beginning of this time period, was there 4.2 days on average a year with more than 1.25 inches in that given year. And later in the period were 6.6 days per year with more than 1.25 inches of runoff. Remember, transport has to occur if you're going to have soil erosion occurring. So as we increase the number of days in which runoff is occurring or potentially occurring, we increase the soil erosion risk. Okay, we're going to do a little bit more data snooping on this. We're going to look at the number of days that occurred in the first half of that time period. We had 2 of them. In the last half of this time period, we have 13. What does that say about our erosion potential and what is occurring? It's increasing. So what is expected? We have a wide range of climate models that are being used now to tell us what we're likely to see in the future. In the Midwest, we're very likely to see stronger storms, more springtime precipitation. Precipitation pattern is going to move towards the spring. We get reduced late summer and fall precipitation. Elevated temperatures, especially coinciding with reduced precipitation. Remember what we said about how much energy is consumed when you evaporate water? If it doesn't rain and there's no water to evaporate, that solar energy is converted to heat, the type that we can feel, rather than being used to evaporate water. It can't be used for both purposes. We expect to see increased heat and drought stress. Now, there's another element associated with these bullets. If we get more springtime precipitation, what does that do to potential root growth, crop root growth depth? Flooding soils do not bode well for rooting depth. And corn, when corn flowers, when it tassels, it basically stops its root growth from occurring. So if we have wet soils in the spring, when root growth is occurring, roots will not grow into flooded or anaerobic areas. So the concern about increased spring precipitation giving us very wet soils, shallowing the root growth, followed by heat and drought stress, also does not bode well. So how does date of tillage and planting affect soil erosion estimates? Or should it? So we've used this daily erosion project model, and we've said, we've asked the question, if we moved our tillage and planting date earlier in the spring, what would the erosion rates be? If we moved it later in the spring, would it affect those soil erosion rates? And we've got those results for you. On the left-hand side of this graph, you will see tillage dates. Now these tillage, the way we run the model, we assume tillage and planting occurs on the same day. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it gives us some evidence and information relative to what's likely to happen. Okay, so the dates of tillage and planting we've identified as April 10th, April 20th, April 30th, you can read. On the right-hand side, we've identified what we've estimated our soil erosion rates would be. We've kept everything else constant except moved the tillage and planting dates earlier in all fields. As we delay our planting dates, and if we get more rainfall in the spring, that very well could happen, we see our soil loss rates also increasing. Why is that? Well, the corn canopy, in this graphic we've illustrated how the soil is being protected by crop residue and the crop canopy itself. The umbrella here represents the crop canopy. The crop residue represents residues that exist on the soil surface prior to tillage. Now tillage is not going to remove all residues, but tillage and planting by and large buries some residue. So there is a time period between when we till and plant and when the crop grows, you see the umbrella, in which we have a vulnerable window for soil erosion. Soil is increased bare related to the tillage and planting, more bare time, and then the cover by the canopy. We see this window of vulnerability progressively moving later into the spring. Okay, we need to couple that with what we're seeing. Now this is our measured data with the Daily Erosion Project, the maximum precipitation rates through the springtime. If we follow that blue line, which is a running average, we see the maximum precipitation rates increase as we get later in the spring. As we delay planting into that later springtime period, we move that window of vulnerability for soil erosion into a higher rainfall characteristic time. So it makes sense. If we have to delay planting, the odds of us increasing soil erosion rates and risk increase. One of the most prevalent and proven characteristics is that of a frequency of heavy rainstorms. The amount of, the frequency of rainfall that occurs more than 4 inches in one day is increased very significantly in our area. Is that going to change? Probably not. Those heavy rainstorms drive our soil erosion rates. Okay, this is somewhat a mirror of the previous slide set. Now we talked about changing tillage timing, but except this one we're shifting the precipitation to either earlier or later than what we're currently observed in our daily erosion project. And we see that if we shift the rainfall, we keep all of our other activities associated with farming and planting and the daily erosion project constant, but we move our rainfall, in this case to the left, we move our rainfall the maximum 15 days earlier, we see our erosion rates increase, in this case, 10%. If we move them 10 days later, we're reducing the erosion rate, but not to the same level as happens when we shift that precipitation earlier. And what is the prognostics, or what is the prediction for rainfall? Increased rainfall earlier in the season. Okay, this graphic illustrates our estimated soil erosion change if we add additional 1-inch rainstorms at different times during the spring. We've taken randomly dry days and simply added 1 more inch of precip, more rainfall in the spring season. This has a really dramatic impact on increasing soil erosion rates. Adding precipitation in the spring will have a significant risk of increasing soil erosion losses. We've done a little bit more magic with this model, or sort of pseudo-magic. We've asked the question, what would our precipitation rate be, or what would our erosion rate be, change, if we added more energy to the rainfall that's occurring? And in this case, we added more energy by adding additional rainfall amounts. As we add that energy, we see our erosion potential increases dramatically. And again, this mirrors what our climate models are suggesting will happen. Now, we may not see the level of energy increase that's depicted here on the extremes of this graph, but changing rainfall energy, which is associated with added rainfall, has a big impact on soil erosion potential. However, if we simply increase the rainfall energy without changing the amount of rainfall that occurs, you say, how can you do that? Well, every rainfall starts slow, or not every, but normally they start slow, peak, and then come back down. You have a given period in which that rainfall occurs. You can increase the energy by squeezing the duration, reducing the duration of that rainfall time, but get increased intensities during the peak of that time, which increases your energy rate. Increasing that energy alone does not have a major impact on soil loss potential. But remember, our climate models and experiences, don't forget experiences. Living on models alone, you'll go broke if you're betting on them. But when you match those with what we're experiencing, it tells us a story that tells us we need to be paying attention. One thing that Ray Arrett, who worked with climate models, always reminded us, all models are wrong, some are useful. And we're playing these as if they are useful, and I think they really are. So my take-home message is this. We already have serious soil erosion concerns. Our statewide average soil erosion rate, this is the hill slope soil erosion rate, that part of the soil, the part of the hill slope along that yellow arrow. Statewide average is somewhere between 3 and 5 tons per acre per year, depending upon which one of the models you want to use. Soil development rates are about 1/2 of 1 ton per acre per year. As we move to the future, our indications are, our climate models are telling us, and we're observing, increased precip in the spring, increased total precipitation during the year, likely to see drier late summer and late fall conditions, but the erosive condition is likely to elevate. It's likely to elevate significantly, and to address that, I believe we have to have a systems approach. We can't build a terrace big enough to handle a 10 or 12-inch rainstorm, and we see those periodically. Not a terrace that you can farm around. We're going to have to use a complement of systems that allow us both to farm and to keep soil in place. So I appreciate the opportunity, and we can do this, but it's going to take an effort on all of us. It's going to take an effort that is bigger than what we've had in the past, because what we're looking at in the future is more aggressive than what we've seen in the past. Thank you.